My name is Anna. I am 27 years old. I work at a small cafe near the train station in Green Hill, a quiet and peaceful town. My life was simple and predictable until that day. It was a cold autumn morning. The wind blew leaves down the street and the sky was gray. I was behind the counter, preparing coffee, when the door opened. A man walked in. He looked around, like someone who didn't know the place. He had dark hair and blue eyes. His clothes were simple, but he looked elegant. There was something about him, something mysterious. "Good morning," he said, smiling a little. "Can I have a cappuccino, please?" "Of course," I answered, trying to sound professional. I made his cappuccino and gave it to him. He paid and walked to a table by the window. He stayed there for a while, looking out at the street and drinking his coffee slowly. He had a book with him, a thick one, but he didn't read much. He just sat quietly. The next day, he came back. "Good morning," he said again, with the same small smile. "Good morning," I replied. He ordered the same drink, a cappuccino. He went to the same table by the window. This time, he opened his book and started reading. He looked focused, like the book was very interesting. Over the next few weeks, he came to the cafe almost every day. He always ordered the same thing, a cappuccino with no sugar. He always sat at the same table by the window. I started to notice his habits. He liked to read, but sometimes he just stared out the window, lost in thought. One morning, while I cleaned the counter, he looked up from his book and asked, "Do you like coffee?" "Yes," I said, smiling. "I work in a cafe, so I drink a lot of it." He laughed softly. "That makes sense." We started talking more. He told me his name was James. He had recently moved to Green Hill. "Why did you move to Green Hill?" I asked one day, curious. "I needed a change," he said. His answer was short. He didn't explain more, and I didn't ask. James seemed like a nice person. He was polite, calm, and interesting. But he didn't talk much about himself. He liked to ask questions about me or about the cafe, but when I asked about him, he always gave short answers. Even though I didn't know much about him, I started to look forward to seeing him every day. James became a part of my routine. There was something different about him. Something I couldn't explain. And I wanted to know more. James became a constant part of my day. When he wasn't at the cafe, I missed him. He had a way of making people feel good, like they mattered. He was kind, funny, and always seemed calm even when the cafe was busy. "Anna," he asked one afternoon, looking out the window. "Do you ever feel stuck in life?" I paused, surprised by the question. "Sometimes," I said carefully. "Why do you ask?" "Because I feel that way," he said quietly, still watching the street. I wanted to ask more. Why did he feel stuck? Was something wrong? But before I could say anything, he changed the subject. James was like that. One moment, he would open a small door into his thoughts, and the next, he would close it again. Still, we grew closer. He often stayed longer at the cafe, and we talked more. One day, he noticed me writing something in a notebook. "What's that?" he asked, pointing. "I'm practicing English," I said. He smiled. "Let me see." I gave him the notebook, feeling shy. He read it and laughed softly. "It's good," he said. "But here, let me help." From that day, James became my unofficial teacher. He taught me new words and corrected my pronunciation. Sometimes I felt embarrassed about my mistakes, but he always encouraged me. You're doing great, he would say, smiling. Don't worry about mistakes. That's how you learn. Our conversations grew deeper. James told me about his love for history. I like stories about the past, he said. They teach us about who we are. He spoke about places he had visited, like old castles and museums. I could see the excitement in his eyes when he talked about those things. What about you? He asked one day. Do you have a dream? I thought for a moment. I want to travel, I said. I've never left Green Hill. You should, he said. There's a big world out there. James made me feel confident, like I could do anything. But at the same time, there was something about him that I didn't understand. He seemed happy in Green Hill, but I could tell he carried something heavy inside him. I often wondered about his life before he came to this small town. Who was he before he walked into the cafe that morning? Why did he seem so distant at times? As the days passed, my feelings for James grew stronger. I wasn't sure if it was just friendship anymore. When he smiled, it made my day brighter. When he laughed, it felt like music. But there was always a part of him that felt out of reach, like he was holding back. And I couldn't help but wonder, what was he hiding? Everything seemed fine until the day James didn't show up. At first, I thought he might be busy. Maybe he was sick, or perhaps he had some errands to run. But when days turned into a week, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. James was a part of my routine, a part of my life. His empty table by the window felt like a silent reminder of his absence. I decided to find out what happened. The only thing I knew about James, besides the cafe, was that he worked as a history teacher at the local school. One afternoon, after my shift, I went there. Excuse me, I said to the woman at the front desk. I'm looking for James, the history teacher. She raised an eyebrow, as if surprised by the question. James? She repeated. He resigned last week. My chest tightened. Resigned? Why? Personal reasons, she said with a shrug, already moving on to other tasks. I stood there, stunned. James had left his job and didn't say anything to me. Why? On the walk back to the cafe, my mind raced. I tried to think of all the places James liked to go. The park where he sometimes walked. The library where he spent time reading. But when I checked those places, he wasn't there. It was as if he had vanished. Back at the cafe, I sat at his usual table by the window. For the first time, I noticed how quiet it felt without him. Why didn't he say goodbye? A part of me felt angry. I thought we were friends. I thought we had something special. But now, it felt like I didn't know him at all. Another part of me worried. What if something bad had happened to him? As I stared out the window, watching people walk by, I realized something. I couldn't just let it go. James wasn't the type of person to disappear without a reason. Whatever it was, I needed to find out. And for that, I would have to look deeper into the mystery of James. For weeks, I tried to accept that James was gone. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop thinking about him. His smile, his laugh, the way he encouraged me, it all lingered in my mind. Then, one chilly morning, as I walked past the train station, I saw him. James! I shouted, running toward him. He turned, and his expression froze. He looked surprised and nervous, like someone caught doing something they shouldn't. Anna, he said, gripping the strap of his backpack tightly. Why did you leave? I asked, my voice shaking with a mix of frustration and relief. James sighed, looking down at the ground. I had to. That's not an answer, I said, my patience running out. You disappeared without saying anything. What's going on? Finally, he looked into my eyes. There was something there, sadness, guilt. It's complicated, he said quietly. I didn't want to involve you. Involve me in what? I demanded, crossing my arms. Anna, he began, his voice soft, I wasn't honest with you. I didn't come to Green Hill just for a change. I was hiding. I blinked, trying to process his words. Hiding? From what? James hesitated, glancing around as if checking to see if anyone was listening. Then he stepped closer. There are things about my past that I didn't tell you, he said. I thought Green Hill would be a safe place to start over, to live quietly. I could feel my frustration growing. You said you trusted me. But you kept all of this a secret. I did trust you, he said, his voice firm. That's why I left. I didn't want my problems to affect you. His words stung, but I could see the sincerity in his eyes. For a moment, we stood in silence. People rushed around us, boarding trains and carrying luggage, but it felt like we were the only two people in the station. James, I said finally, you can't just disappear when things get hard. That's not how friendship works. I know, he said, his shoulders slumping. But I didn't know what else to do. I thought leaving was the best way to protect you. Protect me from what? I asked again. He hesitated before answering. From the mistakes I made in my old life. People I trusted turned against me. I needed to get away, to keep myself safe. I took a deep breath, trying to process everything. Part of me wanted to be angry, to demand more answers. But another part of me saw how tired he looked, how much weight he carried. Why didn't you just tell me? I asked. I was afraid, he admitted. I didn't want to lose you. And I didn't want you to see me as someone broken. His words made my chest tighten. You didn't lose me, James. But you can't keep running forever. He looked at me, his blue eyes filled with uncertainty. I don't know what else to do. I glanced at the train schedule behind him. Are you leaving again? Maybe, he said. I haven't decided yet. I bit my lip, unsure of what to say. I wanted him to stay, but I also wanted him to be safe. You don't have to do this alone, I said finally. Whatever you're running from, we can figure it out together. He gave me a small, sad smile. You don't know what you're offering, Anna. Maybe not, I said, stepping closer. But I do know that leaving isn't the answer. James looked down at his backpack, then back at me. For a moment, it felt like he was deciding something. Okay, he said softly. I'll stay. At least for now. Relief washed over me. Good, I said, smiling despite everything. As the train behind him pulled away from the platform, I realized this was just the beginning. James had secrets, and I still didn't know the whole story. James took a deep breath, as if saying the words out loud was a struggle. Before I came to Green Hill, I worked for a large organization, he began. We dealt with sensitive information, things that most people aren't supposed to know. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. One day, he continued, I discovered something I wasn't supposed to. It was a mistake, but once I found it, I couldn't unsee it. And that made me a problem. What did you find? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. James shook his head. It's better if you don't know. The less you know, the safer you are. I felt frustration building inside me. James, you're doing it again, keeping me in the dark. How can I understand if you won't tell me the whole story? He looked at me, his expression pained. Anna, the people I worked for aren't like us. They don't forgive mistakes. They don't let things go. I had to leave everything behind, my job, my home, my friends, just to stay alive. His words hung in the air, heavy and unreal. Are you in danger now? I asked, my heart pounding. Not anymore, he said, his voice calm but firm. I've been careful. That's why I came to Green Hill. It's quiet here. No one asks questions. I thought I could start over. I folded my arms, feeling the sting of his actions. But then you left again. You didn't even say goodbye. James rubbed the back of his neck, looking ashamed. I saw how close we were getting, and I panicked. I didn't want to drag you into my mess. I swallowed hard, my emotions swirling. Anger, hurt, and relief all mixed together. Why didn't you trust me? I asked, my voice trembling. He looked directly at me, his eyes soft but serious. I trusted you more than anyone, he said. That's why I left. To keep you safe. His words hit me like a wave. I didn't know what to say. A part of me wanted to scream at him for leaving. Another part of me wanted to comfort him, to tell him it was okay. James, I said after a long pause, you can't keep running forever. You need to stop hiding and face this. I know, he admitted, his voice barely audible. But I don't know how. You start by letting someone help you, I said, stepping closer. You don't have to do this alone. James gave a weak smile. You make it sound so easy. It's not, I said honestly. But it's better than running. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The station was quieter now, the rush of passengers gone. James looked at me like he was weighing his options. I didn't think I deserved a second chance, he said softly. Everyone does, I replied. Even you. He took a deep breath, his shoulders relaxing a little. If I stay, he said, there's a chance they could find me. Are you ready for that? I hesitated, but only for a second. We'll deal with it together, I said firmly. For the first time, James looked hopeful. It wasn't much, but it was enough. As we left the station together, I felt a sense of relief. I still didn't know everything about James, and I wasn't sure what the future held. But I knew one thing, I wasn't letting him face it alone. In that moment, I realized James had been trying to protect both of us. But I didn't want our story to end like this. James, I said, my voice steady and determined. You don't have to do this alone. Stay. He hesitated, his expression conflicted. Anna, it's not that simple. Nothing is simple, I replied. But running away won't solve anything. For a long moment, he was silent, his eyes searching mine. Then, he let out a small laugh and shook his head. Maybe you're right, he said softly, a faint smile appearing. Over the next few days, we worked together to help James rebuild his life. He began to make plans to confront the problems he had been avoiding. One evening, as we sat at the cafe after closing, James looked more relaxed than I had ever seen him. "I've been running for so long," he admitted, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. "I almost forgot what it feels like to stop." "You don't have to run anymore," I said. "Not here. Not with me." His gaze softened, and for a moment, I saw the weight lifting from his shoulders. James contacted a lawyer to help him navigate the consequences of his past. It wasn't easy, there were many uncomfortable truths to face, but he did it. I stayed by his side, offering support whenever he needed it. During those weeks, I saw a different side of James. He was still the reserved, thoughtful man I knew, but now, he allowed himself to be vulnerable. He shared more about his past, his fears, and his dreams. One evening, as we walked through the park, he turned to me. "Anna," he said, his tone serious, "I don't think I could have done this without you." "You didn't have to do it alone," I replied, smiling. As time passed, James began to settle into life in Green Hill again. He returned to teaching history, a job he truly loved. His students admired his passion for storytelling, and the staff welcomed him back warmly. At the cafe, his usual table by the window no longer felt like a reminder of his absence. Instead, it became a place where we would sit together after work, talking about everything and nothing. One quiet evening, as we closed the cafe, James stopped me at the door. "Anna," he began, his voice hesitant. "I need to say this." I turned to him, my heart beating faster. "I've spent so much of my life running, hiding," he said. "But here, with you, I feel safe." His words caught me off guard, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. "You don't have to run anymore," I said softly. He smiled, a real, genuine smile that lit up his face. "And I don't plan to," he replied. In the end, James chose to stay in Green Hill. He rebuilt his life, and our bond, whether friendship or something more, only grew stronger. I learned that trusting someone means accepting their secrets, their flaws, and their fears. But it also means helping them find the courage to face their truth. James taught me that life isn't about running from the past, it's about finding the strength to create a future. And together, that's exactly what we did. Comprehension questions. Why did James move to Green Hill? What did Anna do when she realized James had disappeared? How did James decide to face his problems in the end? Creative challenge. Imagine a new chapter. What would Anna and James's future in Green Hill look like? Did you enjoy the story? Leave a comment sharing how you would handle a situation like Anna's.